Hey listeners, Sourdough here. Today's episode is a special edition because we're featuring one of the many experts speaking at the Not Real Art Creators Conference here in LA on March 16th. Our guest today is Ilya Kushnirsky. He's an intellectual property attorney in New York City, and his firm is called KG Law. And Ilya has helped lots of artists over the years, including Roan, Gaia, Olek, Momo, A-Hole Sniffs Glue, Bo Stanton, Woes, Keratos, Distort. I could go on. In today's episode, Ilya and I talk about copyrights and trademarks and everything in between. But it's just a small taste, sample, and primer to what you'll hear at our conference on March 16th. So if you haven't already bought your tickets, be sure to get them today at notrealart.com. Now, let's start the show.
Hello, this is Siri and you're listening to my favorite podcast, Not Real Art. I live for this shit cause it's totally lit.
Ilya Kushnirsky, welcome.
Thank you.
Did I get that right? You have
Ilya.
a very exotic name, my friend.
It's Ilya Kushnirsky. You came about as close as anyone does.
Well, because the Kush, the K-U-S-H, it's like for us weed smokers, it's like Kush, but it sounds like there's an R in there, but the R is...
I think the ski is what I've thought about this way too much in my life. I think the ski is what throws people off, because if it was just Kushner, I think people don't have a problem with that. There's Tony Kushner. They've seen Kushner. The ski, you would think it's just Kushner ski, right? But for some reason, that ski, it causes a mental block for a lot of people where they just kind of stare at the name and they don't even know where to start, even though it's phonetic.
So having an exotic name, I'm sure you've grappled with people struggling with it over the years. I mean, is that a pet peeve for you, or do you just sort of roll with it now?
No,
some people can get really uptight about it.
Not at all. Yeah, I know. I think the main thing I've taken away from it is, I think, empathy for other people who have the same issue, right? So I always try to make sure that I'm getting someone's name right and saying it the way that they want it said and not just the way that, I want to say it. And, that's not always the easiest because you have to be able to roll your tongue and do all kinds of things. And, and I try, but I think that's the main thing.
Right. Well, it's funny because, I so don't have an exotic name, but you would be surprised at how my whole life people have got it wrong, because 9 times out of 10 out of the gate, they'll say Scott Powers. And of course, listeners on the show know me as Sourdough. They don't necessarily know my full name, but not that it matters. I'm just saying it's so funny because my whole life, for me, it was never a big deal. It's like, okay, Powers, I've been called worse. It's Power, whatever.
You just have a porn star name. Right? Scott Power.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Somebody once said that, I guess to get your porn star name, you take the name of the street you grew up on and combine it with the name of your first pet or something. Yeah. Mine would have been Stone Muffin anyway, or Muffin Stone or whatever. I don't even know. But Ilya, it's so good to meet you, man. Thank you for sitting down to chat. It's exciting. Our mutual friend, Logan Hicks, the amazing artist, brought us together. We have an exciting conference coming up. You are a speaker.
That's right.
Logan is a speaker. And the Not Real Art Conference on March 16th. Not real. What does that mean, Ilya? Not Real Art. What does that mean to you?
I think the way I read it is, I think a lot of artists are probably used to, a lot of working artists are probably, who aren't necessarily part of what we think of as the art world, right? Are probably used to having that sort of feeling of marginalization or alienation from something, right? Because I think, the vast majority of people don't really interact with the art world, but they have a conception of what it is, right? And that's highbrow, museum openings, that sort of thing, right? Like $1 million art pieces and things like that. And the reality is, I think that, 99.9% of artists live outside of that conception, right? And go about their days trying to make a living through their art and their craft and their self-expression. And I think they get that a lot of times. Sort of the reaction to what they do is like, oh, well, that's not real art, right? Because it's not, it's not the Coon's dog, or it's not whatever that really narrow perception that people have of what art is.
Yes. Yeah, I know. It's funny because when I talk to artists and I tell them about Not Real Art, they laugh. They get the joke and the satire immediately because they've struggled because it feels like, and I was talking to this one artist about it, he said, every new art movement throughout history was sort of regarded by the intelligentsia or the gatekeepers of the day. Well, that's not authentic. That's not real. That's not real art. And so on the artist side, artists get the joke. But it's funny when I've talked to, other folks in the art world, whether they be gallerists or dealers or collectors or whatever, they just look at me with this, what does that even mean? What do you mean not real art?
Yeah, no, it's actually funny. I think, how we sort of view legitimacy, right, of different mediums. And, when movies came out first, right, that was this is lowbrow. This isn't real art. When novels were first being written, there was the same conception. And when theater came out, and these are all things that we think of as highbrow now, right? Like this is the stuff that, the New York Times will review or that, people with money go to see or do. And, comic books obviously had a legitimacy crisis, which was actually kind of a moral panic. And that a lot of times these things kind of overlap, right? And yeah, it's funny that, if you don't really think about the history of these things and you don't see how much of a cycle, this legitimacy question is, it's very easy to fall back into that mindset that a lot of people have.
For sure. And, I think the sort of underlying implication of the confusion around this gets to like, well, how can it be real art if it's not expensive? Because, you were talking about earlier about the kind of the blue chip kind of fine art world, which is really now an asset class, right? I mean, like it's a way of laundering your money.
It's a money laundering operation. Yeah, absolutely. On a global scale.
Mm-hmm. So, we're here to hack the system a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
I'm so grateful, Ilya, that you are coming to the conference and talking and bringing your expertise and your passion for helping artists in their careers, from a legal perspective. I mean, you're an attorney, right? You're an intellectual property attorney. I don't know if they call it art law as well or whatever, like how art law differentiates necessarily from intellectual property. But this is not just your passion, but your profession. Tell us a little bit about KG Law and your firm, the history, the roots, how you've come to be here today.
Yeah. So I have a small law firm in Manhattan in New York City called KG Law. I'm the K and my partner Andrew Gerber is the G. And we started this firm about 7 years ago. And the main thing that we do, we do a lot of different things, but we pretty much work entirely with artists, creative professionals, and creative agencies. We work with some tech companies as well, some sort of small tech startups, but the vast majority of what we do is on the creative side. And like you said, it's a lot of intellectual property or IP work. And we do a number of different things depending on, what clients need. So, if an artist is doing a deal, we'll help them with that. But the majority of what we do actually is we help enforce artists' copyrights. So we do a lot of copyright infringement work. So somebody has a mural and, I'm not going to name names here, right? But if a big brand decides, hey, what would be cool? What would appeal to...
Can I name the brands?
Yeah, sure. I'll just do a no comment after.
Okay, good to know I have that license, H&M.
They're definitely one, but there's a lot of less publicized cases where, they're at least as egregious as that. That one just caught fire a little bit, but, we've handled dozens of these types of cases at this point. But, if a brand decides, what would appeal to, to our target demographic would be to, pose these models in front of this mural, right, to sell, clothes or cars or shoes or whatever, really. That happens a lot because I'm guessing that, the ad research, the market research shows that people like street art. That stuff sells. So that tends to happen a lot. Plus, obviously the murals are out in the street,
Well, isn't that the kind of the core of the misunderstanding? Like there's in terms of lazy thinking, it's like, oh, it's on the street. It's public. Like it's public domain. Like I can shoot in front of this mural because this artist gave this to this block. And so therefore I don't have to worry about getting rights or getting money or, to the artist. Yeah,
that is absolutely the misconception. And it really gets to this sort of metaphysical differentiation between, what is intellectual property really? It's not a tangible right. It's, it's the right to control how your work is used. So just because somebody paid you to do a commission or paid you to do a work doesn't mean that they necessarily are buying away from you all of your IP rights. If I paint, if I make a painting and I sell you that painting, then there are things you can do with it, and that's considered fair use, right? Because you've bought the actual painting from me. So you can display it, you can take pictures of it, you can put it on your Instagram. Hey, here, this is in my house. You can't make copies of it and resell it. You can't sell prints of it, So there's differences, right, between what you can do with the actual physical thing and then what you can do with sort of the meta rights that exist within that thing. And that's what intellectual property law is really all about.
So, yeah, I mean, you touched on a lot of really, interesting things. And I know a lot of artists who have grappled with this, in LA, some of those cases are catching fire. I mean, do you think, some of these cases catch fire because of social media now, or some cases just more precedent setting than others?
So precedent is an interesting word there, because as a term of art, like in the legal world, that means, there isn't really precedent unless, you take a case all the way through and you get, a judge to make a decision.
By the way, not to interrupt, but I'm thinking of like 5 points right now. Like, right. You know what I mean? Like,
sure. Yeah. There's definitely precedent in the 5 points decision because that's actually made its way through the courts to some extent. The H&M, sorry, is it revoke?
Revoke. Yep. Shout out Revoke.
So that's, to my knowledge, not a case that, and that's not a case that I was involved in, but to my knowledge, that's not a case that actually made its way through court systems. So, but there's this sort of, I think, precedent that's set in the more of the court of public opinion and the sort of norms that exist around this sort of thing. I think that case caught fire for a couple of reasons, one of which was that H&M had absolutely the most boneheaded, tone-deaf response possible to it, which was, we've gotten this response from infringers in the past too, which is, you got to think about it this way. Like, these are large corporations that exist in a particular reality. None of these people that work at these companies know any street artists. Their liaison to street art, their sort of entree into that world is usually their ad agencies that they work with, but nobody at H&M knows or cares about any of this stuff, I would think. And so certainly their lawyers don't. And so they thought, we're going to fight against this because this was an illegal piece, right? Like, this wasn't a commission, this was.
And they didn't have a permit.
He didn't have the permit, right? He wasn't, and there's nothing in copyright law that says that copyright only attaches to pieces that go through the right agencies to get, no, it doesn't. It's completely silent on that. Copyright is completely separate from, whether a piece went through the right channels. The Copyright Act says that as soon as you, in the language of the Copyright Act, as soon as you fix the work in a tangible medium, then copyright attaches to it. And so not only did they have a really bad argument legally, but it's the sort of thing that I think in the public consciousness is just outrageous, and I think people were rightly outraged by that, that, instead of resolving this thing, you're going to accuse this guy of creating illegal art and saying that he doesn't have any rights in it because it's illegal. I mean, it was just a really tone deaf response.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating as well, right? Because somehow on some level, so illegality somehow negates copyright, or you're getting back to our earlier conversation about not real art. It's like, graffiti's not art because it's vandalism.
Right. Yeah. Recycling like 80s and 90s arguments, right? Like, more, again, coming back to moral panics, right? It's ridiculous.
So, I mean, how do artists afford you, Ilya? I mean, this is a fancy office. You're in the 500th floor of the Empire State Building. No, this is a very well-appointed, humble office, very functional. I like it. Talk about that. How do you work with artists who are notoriously, they're struggling like any small business?
Yeah. So first, I just do want to correct the record, because for my New Yorkers who might listen to this, we're definitely not in the Empire State Building. In fact, I don't go above 23rd Street.
Well, by the way, there's not 500 floors in the Empire State Building. Right. Like, that was supposed to be a clever joke, but no one. But I'm glad you're pointing this out.
Well, that's sure. The floor really doesn't matter, but I think New Yorkers are very territorial.
Where are you in New York?
We're in Union Square.
Union Square, yeah. People. We're in Union Square.
The way that we're able to work with artists is that we have completely built our business model around the realities of being an artist. So if somebody comes to us and they're creative agency and they have 20 people on staff and they're doing deals and things, then we charge them the regular way that we would, a profitable company. If an artist comes to us, I've seen artist tax returns. I know, I've never been an artist myself, but I know the economic reality of what it means to be an artist. And I know that if an artist is lucky enough to get, like a $20,000 commission, that might be the only work that they have, the only paying work they might have for 4 or 6 months. Right. So,
yes.
So you can't just sort of look at it as, this person's getting these large commissions, they must be rolling in money. That's not the reality. So we have a completely different business model that we use with artists, which is generally most artists don't pay us anything. And if we have a case that we can bring and we think that we can get money for the artist because some of their rights were violated, through copyright infringement or whatever, then we would rather have the infringing party pay our bills than the artist. Because you can say that you're out here helping artists, but if you're cutting into their paychecks, and lawyers aren't cheap, then are you really helping them on balance, right? Like if you're getting them the result they want, but then they have to pay your bill and that takes all the money away that you just got for them, like, have you really helped them? So our model really takes that into account. And obviously that means that if somebody doesn't have a good case and we don't think that we can do anything for them, we will tell them that, and we just won't take the case rather than, have them pay for something that that we're not going to be able to get them a result.
So what are the, I'm just making up numbers here, but I mean, what are the 3 things that artists listening today can do on their own to protect themselves smartly, to work smartly, to protect themselves against infringement and other, related matters, so they don't end up having to hire you in the first place, right? I mean, how can artists, and this gets to maybe some of the things that we'll talk about even at the conference, like what are some of those very sort of fundamental things that artists can do to protect themselves against impropriety?
Yes, that's a good question. I think one issue I would have with the framing of that is that I don't know that there's anything you can really do to prevent these things from happening, but you can put yourself in a position where if they do happen to you, you're going to be in a much better place to handle them. Whether that means, deal with them cheaply, deal with them effectively, make money from them, that sort of thing. The reality is everybody's work gets infringed from artists who are just starting out. And, we've had cases where I've literally had cases where an artist hadn't even released the work yet, and it had already gotten infringed in China and then mass produced in the US. And it's like, how did this company even get this? Like, this wasn't even publicly
available. Some James Bond high crimes and whatnot.
It happens from that very early stage of artists who are just starting out to the absolute highest levels. Everybody gets infringed. We've had cases where lots of muralists had been infringed in the same case, and we ended up representing some of them, but not others, because they're just at a level where we don't really even have access to them. Like a Shepard Fairey or somebody like that. And I figure, he's probably got a lawyer that he likes already, but they were infringed just as much as anybody else. So I don't know that there's a way to prevent this stuff from happening. And actually, I think that's one of my pieces of advice there, is that it's probably going to happen to you. I think one way to almost measure success is kind of the frequency with which it does happen to you, and to not really get stressed out when it does. I have some clients who get very, very stressed when an infringement happens, and they think, that this is going to end their career somehow, that it's going to completely, dry up the market for their work. And I don't think it really does. I think there's ways to really contain that sort of damage.
Well, I was going to ask. So, and again, part of why I'm so grateful that you're at the conference and we're talking today, because I feel like there's a lot of myths out there, right? About, what people might do to protect themselves or whatever, or trademark something, copyright something, what have you. And I heard something a long time ago. I don't know if it's true. I'm asking you now, but it has to do, I guess, with damages and punitive damages. Like if you and again, this might be wrong, but what I remember hearing was like, yes, there's an inherent copyright, and yes, you can fight that, but your damages are limited because you haven't filed a copyright on that image. And for what, $30 or whatever, if you fill out the copyright and apply for that copyright, then suddenly your upside, if you have to sue and there's damages, you can sue for damages because you took that step versus if you had not. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. And that's sort of where I was going with this. So even though you can't prevent infringement from happening, you can put yourself in a much better position to deal with it. And the absolutely number one with a bullet thing that you can do is to register your copyrights. That is, if you take one thing away, and this is, anytime I do a talk with artists, that's the number one thing I talk about. And I have some clients that I've sort of managed to beat it into them at this point, having, worked with them for so many years, and others who definitely are still resistant to it because at the end of the day, it's paperwork, it's boring, it's somewhat confusing because it's a bureaucratic process, and it's actually pretty easy to do it wrong because when you go onto the Copyright Office website to register your work, you see all these different categories that don't necessarily apply to the type of work you do. It can be a little bit difficult because it's a little bit of an antiquated system. So, it can be somewhat daunting for people, but is the number one thing to take the time and the effort and the energy to learn that website and to make registering your works a part of your process. When you come out with a new piece, mark it down, register it within a month of making the piece, and try to get into a rhythm of doing that, because yes, it is the best thing you could do. And why is it the best thing? Because exactly like you said, people have this misconception. It's a partial misconception, but it's effectively a misconception that your art is copyrighted from the moment you create it. And that's true, but it's also toothless because copyright law is basically like a two-class or two-caste system. There's registered works and there's unregistered works. And if your work is registered, it's like flying in first class, and unregistered works, that's like flying coach with no leg room, right? And you're in the middle seat. The damages are completely different. The damages frameworks are completely different. The leverage you have is completely different. If your work is registered, one of the main things is you can recover your attorney's fees from the other side. So, that's a huge leverage point, because why would they fight it if not only are they paying for their lawyers, but they know that by the end of it, you're just racking up your own legal fees that they're going to have to pay you for. So we absolutely settle cases much, much faster and for much larger amounts of money when the works are registered. That is the number one thing that artists should do.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting how you said that, something about making it a part of your process, right? It's like post-production processes. It's like okay, you made the piece, now, do this. So just to kind of, bring it back down to earth a little bit. Let's say I'm, a street artist, sourdough. I'm a famous street artist. I write sourdough. Yeah. So I've created this amazing piece. People are loving it. Of course, it's illegal. I didn't have a permit to do it, but it's badass and it's dope and people love it. So I took my iPhone, I took a photo of it and took several photos of it. I went home. I went on the government website, as painful as it was to do it. I sat down. I happened not to screw it up too much. I paid my $30 and I fill out the form and I'm done. So you're telling me if I do that, I have registered that illegal mural. It's formally and properly copywritten. And I've protected myself, having taken that step as part of my post-production process.
That's right. And the reason that it's important to make it part of your process and not to just sort of let it go until, let's say the end of the year, or just to not procrastinate on it, is that whether you get those enhanced damages and those enhanced rights really depends on the timing of when you register it. So if you create your work today and you register it tomorrow and then it's infringed the day after, then you're good. But if you create it now and then it's infringed before it's registered, then you might have a problem. And there's a little bit of a grace period there, not to complicate things too much, but the grace period basically says all of that stuff about, whether the infringement or the registration came first, don't worry about that as long as you register your work within 90 days of making it. Okay. So that's why 90 days is really the important date. And that's why I said a month before, because I know that, if you say 90 days, people are going to do it on the 89th day or the 90th day. So just think of it as within a month of making the work, your job is to register it. And you're right, it costs $35. Once you do one of them, all the later ones are going to fit in the same mold. So if the first one takes you an hour to do, the next one is going to take you 10 minutes. The one after that is going to take you 5 minutes. And I do have a lot of clients who now just register all of their stuff. They've gotten into the habit of it, and it's not that, the painful part is doing it the first time and figuring out that process.
Right. Feels like there should be an app for this.
I think there should be apps for a lot of sort of government bureaucratic functions, but they're barely at the point of having.
Well, they're not even open right now. Oh no, they are open right now.
They're open,
partially open.
Right? Yeah, they had emergency funding for a while, but I guess now everything's open again.
For 3 weeks
3
until
weeks, 2.5 weeks. Yeah.
So, well, that's really cool. And see, that's the kind of, I think, critical, value added, career changing, empowering information, right, that we want to share at the conference coming up on March 16th.
Yeah. And you know what? Let me put some numbers on it so that people can really, so this isn't quite as abstract, right? These numbers are completely approximated, but they're in the ballpark of what I see on a daily basis. And I've had, hundreds of these types of infringement cases at this point. Let's compare an artist who has not registered their work to someone who has registered their work, right? And let's say that your work is being used in an ad campaign for a clothing retailer. If you haven't registered your work and we go after that clothing retailer, well, maybe we'll get you a couple $1,000, maybe 5,000 in that ballpark. If you've registered your work, probably looking at more like 20,000, 30,000. I mean, real numbers.
That's real money.
Yeah, that's real money. Maybe more, maybe more. It really is a huge, huge difference. And it, like you said, it costs $35 and, maybe an hour of someone's time to register. So it really is it makes such a massive difference. A lot of copyright lawyers won't even take your case if you haven't registered the work because it's so uncertain what's going to happen. And the damages that are available to you are so limited that it might not be worth it for them to do it.
Well, look, I might be crass here, but I kind of feel like it's some artists are going to hate me for saying this, but I kind of feel like it's a lack of professionalism. I mean, if you're a professional artist, and you are approaching your work with the kind of discipline, rigor, seriousness, you are being thoughtful, strategic, smart about, your work and your career. And this just feels like 101 shit. Like, but yet to your point, right? It's like, it's paperwork. Artists don't like paperwork. I mean, nobody likes going on a government website. I mean, I don't care who you are, right? It's a painful thing. It's a huge deterrent, right? But I don't know. I just feel like if and I'm not saying that the artist isn't talented. Like you can have super talented artists that are way unprofessional. But I'm just saying, like, if you want to up your game as a professional artist, these are just one of those steps that set you up for success.
Yeah, it's interesting. I work with so many artists, and usually, the first time somebody comes to me, one of the questions I'll ask them is their work registered? And I still haven't figured out the pattern of who the people are who registered, because there's some people who come to me and they're like, I've registered every single thing I've done since I was, in college. And there's others who sometimes are much more well-known artists, right? People who sell work and who have gallery shows and who do a lot of commissions who don't have a single registration. And I haven't really figured out what the pattern is. I've actually gone into, I was so curious about this. I went into the copyright database, which is free and publicly accessible online. And I've typed in names of, famous artists just to see. And there's a lot of them that just don't have any registrations whatsoever. I haven't figured it out. So I completely agree with you. I don't blame artists for not doing it because I think nobody is really out there telling artists to do this. I think my understanding is that
art schools certainly aren't teaching them.
No, right. My understanding is art schools don't even touch on this sort of thing. There's no, water coolers for artists to meet around and say, hey, what, got any tips for me? That sort of thing, right? So I don't blame artists, but if there was a widespread shift in this one specific area, I think we would see a lot less infringement overall because there would be ripple effects. There would be it's like the reason an infringement happens is it's not accidental. It is an intentional manifestation of the power dynamic, the discrepancy in power between these large corporations and these individual artists. And the corporations know that, what is the artist going to do? They, A, most artists don't have their shit together, so they haven't registered anything. B, what are they going to do? Hire a lawyer, go after us? And C, even if they do, we'll deal with it then. We'll deal with the repercussions then. And if artists started to take these proactive steps, I think that would be a real deterrent for a lot of these companies. If they started to face a lot more sophisticated pushback, and a sense of we're not going to take it anymore, I think this wouldn't happen as much, and I think that the reality is we get new cases, we get new referrals for artist infringement cases pretty much every single day of the year. I think people think of this as sort of an intermittent thing because they see it on their social media or they hear about it happening to their friends. This is an epidemic. This is happening to everybody, and it's happening all the time. So it is not an accident. It is not something that you sort of grow out of, like, once I'm at a certain level, they'll stop copying me. No, it's never going to happen. You just have to do these things to protect yourself.
Let me ask you this. And again, this probably falls in the category of true or false mythologies, what have you. But I think I remember somebody telling me that you can do a batch registration. So if I'm following a copyright, like I don't necessarily have to file a copyright 100 copyrights for 100 pieces. I can file one copyright and have all those 100 pieces on that application. Is that correct?
Yeah, it is, but there's so many caveats and so many asterisks and footnotes to that I will tell you this. I have almost never seen an artist do a batch application correctly in a way that did not invalidate the copyright. So I completely understand the impulse to, I have 50 works, 50 times 35 is a lot of money. I'd rather just pay the 35. The problem is you have like a 90% chance of invalidating the entire registration.
90% chance. That's high. They're going to screw it up.
If they do it through a lawyer, that chance comes down to, if they do it through me, that chance comes to close to zero. But if they do it on their own, it's almost 95% chance. And that's because you can only batch register works that fit specific criteria. They have to be published all in the same year. They have to have exactly the same authors or, artists, creators. So if one of them was a collaborative work, you're out of luck. That one has to go. If you didn't publish them all in the same year, then you screw up the entire thing. If you don't organize them in a particular way, that's going to screw it up. It's not that it's impossible to do, but it's so risky that I definitely do not recommend it. I've had a lot of difficult conversations with clients who are very sort of rigorous and conscientious about, registering all of their stuff. And they come to me and they say, I got infringed. I have registered everything. Here it is. And the registration is just not valid, and it's not defensible. And I can see that just by looking at it. So I know that the other side is just going to, rip it to shreds. And that can be a heartbreaking thing for people to hear that, not only did they spend the money to do this thing and they thought they were protected, but they actually weren't.
So, I want to, because I'm having a situation I wanted to talk to you about, in terms of making this real, right? Because Not Real Art is our name, is our brand. And I want to protect it. Right. I want to trademark it. I want to hire you to help me to do that. So, what can we do to protect Not Real Art as a brand, as a trademark? Moving forward.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. So we have been talking about copyright, right, which is the area of IP that covers, expressive works, right? So paintings, drawings, sculptures, books, music, film, right? Theater, all of that is, that's expressive works, and that's the world of copyright. The world of trademark is different. And I think a lot of people either kind of use those interchangeably or aren't exactly sure what the difference is. But trademarking is essentially protecting either your name or your logo or, like a slogan, something that you use to sell products or services under, right? In the sort of legal parlance, it's referred to as an identifier of source. So the idea is, if you're going to put Not Real Art on a t-shirt or on a tote bag, or if you're going to do a podcast or you're going to do a conference. Those are all types of things that you can market and, quote unquote, sell under that name or under that mark. And so that's where trademark applies. So if you want to register Not Real Art for, events, conferences, professional events, things like that, you can do that. Another misconception I think that people have is that you can sort of trademark a name or a phrase and then you just own it, right? It's much more limited than that, right? Because when you're registering your trademark, you have to specify exactly the types of products or services that you're going to market under that trademark. And other people can come in and use that same, name or phrase as long as they're doing something completely unrelated, right? So if somebody wanted to, let's say you register Not Real Art for conferences, for events, for podcasts, maybe for other, maybe for, web TV or other things that you intend to do. Somebody could open a grocery store called Not Real Art. Not a great name for a grocery store. I wouldn't recommend it.
I wouldn't shop there.
No. I mean, I might go in there just to see what's up.
I would totally be intrigued.
Yeah, but I don't think I'd buy bananas or something there. I wouldn't trust that they're But they could do it, right? Because it is very different. There's no likelihood of confusion. The test for trademark infringement is likelihood of confusion. But if they started to kind of creep into your territory, things that are kind of closer or more related to the types of things that you had indicated in your trademark application that you're actually doing with the Not Real Art brand, then you'd be able to stop them. You'd be able to, you'd essentially send them a cease and desist letter and say, hey, I've already staked the claim here. I own this trademark for these specific products and services. The way you're using it is too confusing. You got to stop. So that's sort of what trademarks do for you. And they're obviously very different from copyright. They're not going to be necessarily as relevant to, let's say an artist just starting out. But if you're going to be doing products, let's say you have a specific character that you always draw, right? Or a logo. We have one specific example. We work with an artist that I think A-Hole Sniffs Glue in Wynwood in Miami. Great guy. We've been working with him for years. He does his eyeball, right? The droopy eyeball, and that's sort of his signature symbol. Obviously, he does a lot. He's a great artist. He does a lot of different things, but he does a lot of different variations on that. That's an example of something that is both copyrighted and trademarked because it is an expressive work that he, layers and pastiches and does all kinds of things with. And that's the world of copyright. But he also uses that one specific eyeball on a lot of different, stickers and,
it's iconic.
and products. Yeah, it is. Exactly. People, you see that and who is responsible for the thing that you're looking at. And that's exactly what trademark is supposed to be. It's like the Nike swoosh, right? Is the classic example, or the Apple, or you have these famous logos. So that's an example of something that's both copyrightable and can be trademarked. And it in fact is registered in both ways.
Right. So, well, that's super helpful. So you talked about registering Not Real Art in different categories. In terms of paying for trademarking Not Real Art, do you pay per category?
Yeah, unfortunately, you pay per category, and those fees go directly to the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So they charge per class of goods, which, is what we're calling categories here. And those categories are incredibly antiquated, like 19th century antiquated, in the sense of there's like 44 of them. And like, there's one of them that includes like all of technology, pretty much, isn't just one of those categories. But there's like a whole category for like rubber goods or something like that, like like industrial age shit, where there'll be like different categories for like paint adhesive, like paint non-adhesive. Like it's from like a real kind of, to quote a 90s term, meat space world, right? Where it's pretending that like people still manufacture all these different things and they all have their own classes. But yeah, so that's actually one of the nice advantages, one of the side effects of that classification is you pay by class. And because most things that people do, like modern people do, end up falling into one or two classes, it does limit the costs. But trademark is definitely way more expensive than copyright, because the least that you can pay pretty much is about $275 per class. So if you're in 3 classes, you're already looking at close to $1,000 for just filing fees alone.
Yeah, I filed a couple of trademarks over the years, and of course, prices change, things change, markets are different, what have you. I think I remember over the years paying anywhere from $2,500 to $5,000 for a trademark, in LA, so I don't know, in terms of where that is. But yeah, I know that Not Real Art, the name, the words, people seem to love it, like it, laugh, makes, like, let's face it, there's nothing proprietary about a conference. There's nothing proprietary about a podcast necessarily, right? But Not Real Art is our identity and we want to protect it.
Right. Yeah, no, it's a good candidate for that, because the other thing with trademark law is you have to actually use the thing that you want to protect as a trademark. You can't just, that has a specific meaning within trademark law, right? You can't just, for example, trademark your signature, for example. Like if you, just because you put it on every canvas, that's not considered a trademark, because you're not using that mark to entice people to sell things to them. It really has to be basically like a brand name or a logo. And you have to use it in particular ways. You have to use it as a trademark. But yeah, Not Real Art's a good candidate for that.
It's funny. We recently exhibited at Designer Con in Anaheim. Are you familiar with Designer Con? So we co-produced Designer Con with Ben Gretzky shout out Ben, in 2016 and 2017. We didn't co-produce in 2018, but we had a booth there, and Ben was nice enough to hook us up. So Not Real Art, we had a Not Real Art booth, and it was the first public showing of the brand, if you will. And so I have this big curved wall sort of pops up, and it's just a white, kind of background with the letters, in black, Not Real Art. And I purposely designed the mark to be incredibly generic and bland. I mean, like, it's purposely utilitarian, right? And so I had this wall. I was shocked at how many people walked up and got selfies with this generic looking wall. Like, it was just really funny to me, because I was just like, you just never know, right? Like, what's going to motivate somebody.
Yeah, I think that phrase really kind of fires off synapses for people. It's a good phrase.
It's completely ridiculous. That's what I love about it, because it reminds me of myself. Completely ridiculous. So thank you for that, man. I mean, artists are prolific generators of intellectual property. And I remember being on a panel. Years ago, we were hired by, I think it was Emerald Exhibitions. They produce Surtex, the art licensing show here at Javits. And so they were trying to bring in, if you've ever been to the art licensing show, have you ever been to Surtex?
No, I've not been
to
that.
Do you know what it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, anyway, so it's like conventionally or historically, whatever, these shows are very kind of middle America. You know what I mean? Lots of graphic design based patterns, lots of rainbows and owls and unicorns, and they wanted to bring in, street art. And so they hired us to help them do that, because they didn't know even where to begin. And we brought graffiti into that show. And, these artists that we brought, these artists are incredibly prolific, right? They're always creating. So I was on this panel, and this graphic designer asked me, what if they steal my idea? What do I do to protect myself? And I was perhaps a little bit simplistic and crass at the time, but I basically said, so what? So what if they steal your idea? Like literally, you're an artist. You're going to have 50 more ideas by the end of the night before you go to bed, and they're stealing your idea because they can't think of one of their own. It kind of comes with the territory. Now, I wasn't. I said you should always take your steps, necessary steps, protect yourself, so on and so forth. Every situation is different, but the reason I'm bringing this up is because artists are always creating intellectual property. Right. And so, one of the things that the reason we're doing the conference, I want to try to help artists, encourage artists to think differently about the work that they do and the career that, that they have, because I would argue that an artist is in the intellectual property business.
Oh, absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
And I think that, unfortunately, for all kinds of reasons, maybe A lot of artists out there, perhaps younger artists, they think very specific. Like, I'm an artist, I make art, I'm on the canvas, it's a product, this is what it is. When in fact, if you are trying to make a living, if you're trying to monetize your work and you're trying to enhance your income and you want to work smart, and by the way, dare I say, try to figure out a way to make money while you sleep. You have to think of your art as intellectual property, and you need to look for those opportunities to monetize that IP beyond the canvas. And so, these things that we're talking about, copyright, trademark, what have you, like all these things are sort of essential to begin to set yourself up to license the rights and monetize the rights, right, to your art, to your intellectual property. Earlier you were talking about making this part of their process. One of the things that I have told artists that I would like for them to make a part of their process is you finish a canvas and you, one way or another, pay for or acquire a museum quality, high res digital image of that work, right? Because, years ago when we were helping artists, license their work, because, there was a time in our company's background where we were doing some art licensing. One of the major problems was that most artists did not have high resolution, museum quality photographs of their work. And, you can't license a shitty image, So anyway, so I just think, the work you do is so important. You and I are both, advocates. I think the phrase is art advocate, but I'm an artist advocate.
Right. 100%. I think everything you said, I think is just axiomatically true. I mean, because if you think about it, if you're an artist today, that's great. But ideally, you have to think about, do you still want to be an artist in 10 years? Do you want to be an artist in 20 years, right? Or is it just something that you're kind of half committing to now? Because if you want to keep doing it in 10 years, then you have to make money from it. That's the reality. Otherwise, you will have some other job that you do, and then you will occasionally, when you still have the energy and the time, you will create some art, right? So if you want to be a working artist, you want art to be the thing that you do, then you have to figure out how to make money from it. It's just axiomatically true, because we can't live in this society without money, right? We have to pay rent and we have to pay bills and we have to eat. And, at some point, even if an artist's young, they might want to have a family, and there's all kinds of expenses, right? There's healthcare, there's everything.
Well, and this of course opens up such a bigger conversation as well. And you and I have chatted about it a little bit about this, over the phone a couple of times, but and we mentioned Wynwood earlier. I was at Art Basel early in December, and I was, in Wynwood and walking around. And obviously, it's amazing in terms of the prolific, work down there. But, quite frankly, I just left angry, in part because I'm willing to guess 9 out of 10 of those murals were done for free. And, and I look, the artists reserve the right to give their work away and give their time away and do free work if they think that's worth the risk or worth the investment or what have you. And so, I don't know, just everything that we're trying to do, everything, I think my whole, ethos over the years has been to try to empower and encourage artists to be smarter about their business and be smarter about the business they're in, and the fact, the value they create and the intellectual property that they create and what's that worth. And, it's funny, I was talking to this artist one time, and, these are complicated issues.
Sure.
I don't, I'm not trying to oversimplify, but I was talking to this artist one time, and I was just trying to make it super easy for them. And I was like, what do you want to make, like in terms of a salary? And what do you think sounds like a lot of money, or what would you need to be comfortable? Oh, it'd be phenomenal if I made $150,000 a year. Okay, let's do the math. How many hours a week do you want to work? How many weeks in the year?
Yeah,
okay.
You can just go backwards.
Just
right?
go backwards. Then you'll have a number. How much you should be charging for an hour of your time. Right. Let's start there. Just these simple models that, it is always hard to negotiate if you're not a good negotiator. And, when capital has the capital, right, the golden rule, the person with the goals make the rules, it's hard sometimes to really, stand up for what you're worth. But this is why we're doing conferences. This is why we're doing the podcast, to try to start a different conversation and empower people with knowledge and confidence.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this stuff is incredibly complicated, and none of this is by accident, right? Like, this system is set up in a way to disempower artists, to put them at a disadvantage when it comes to negotiation, when it comes to enforcing their rights and knowing what they're worth. People shouldn't think that, there's some inherent flaw in their personality or in their abilities or in their, that they just lack some skill. I think you need to understand that this happens to everybody, and it's by design. And it is one of the challenges that you will face as an artist, is dealing with the reality that, look, in every negotiation, it doesn't matter who you are. I mean, I've represented large companies in negotiations. The other side always wants to pay as little as possible. That is just the fundamental principle of negotiation. You try to either get as much as you can or pay as little as you have to. But there are various power dynamics that come into play that can sort of move the needle on that, right? So whether it's, your leverage in terms of, if you're selling out shows, obviously you're going to be able to probably command a higher premium. Or but also if you show that you have your shit together, if you are sophisticated, if you show that you've been through this process before, that you know what to say or you know what they're going to say, they will respect you, and because you're playing that game that they have set up for you to play. I think that's, if you want to sell your work and you want to be a working artist, that's one of the things that you have to do. I kind of think of it as there's a few dimensions, right? So you can be, anyone who makes art can be an artist. But if you want to be a working artist, to me, that's a whole different thing. And I think of it as there's three dimensions, right? There's the creative. You have to create the work. But that's the part that comes easiest to people, right? The people who want to be artists already have that just in their DNA. The second thing is you have to be an entrepreneur, right? And I don't mean that in a like annoying kind of Silicon Valley way, right? But you have to be a business person. You have to understand that anytime a transfer of money comes into play, that is business. It is not a dirty word to the extent that you need money to live, right? I mean, if you have a trust fund and you don't need money, then by all means,
God bless you.
Yeah, exactly. But that's not 99.9% of people, and certainly not 99.9% of creative people. And you have to embrace that aspect of being a working artist, which is sort of the business side of it. And you have to learn the industries that you work in. You have to be willing to stand up for yourself. You have to find the people that are going to support you, whether that is, a gallerist or a manager or a lawyer or an accountant or an advisor, whoever it is. I'm not saying go and blow your entire, monthly budget on advice and service, but you need to surround yourself with people who are going to reinforce your identity as a serious person in this field, somebody to be taken seriously. And I think there's this sort of third dimension that I think rarely enters the equation for people, which is you kind of have to be an activist, because a lot of what we're talking about can't be done on your own. You don't exist in a vacuum, right? And there are repercussions to what you do, and there are things you can learn from what other people do. And I think you have to take, activists can mean a lot of different things. I don't necessarily mean like get involved in politics or anything like that. What I mean is understand, try to learn and understand what are the different dynamics at play in the industry that you work in, how things work, which factors work against you and how you can deal with them. And also what are the implications of your own actions? So I wanted to, you mentioned, you went to Wynwood, you got angry that all of these artists are working for exposure, right?
Exposure bucks.
Right. When an artist, and you said, people can give away their work for free, but I think when they do that, they should think about what that does to other artists, right?
100%.
You're not the only person, this is not, you can't live this sort of solipsistic existence where, whatever you do doesn't affect other people. If you give away your work, why would other people pay other artists? Because they know that there's somebody out there that they can get it for free. It
devalues everybody's work.
Not just yours, right? It devalues other artists' work, and it keeps these really entrenched power dynamics and disparities as entrenched as they are. And I think there absolutely is, and that's why I differentiate the activist angle from the business angle, because when you're talking about the business angle, by all means, just think about yourself, think about your career, think about your family, think about paying your bills. But there has to be this other activist angle to it, because, otherwise, like, we're not much better than, finance people or others who, people who like destroy the earth for profit, right? Like, there has to be some level of awareness or sort of like, some moral component to this, at least some awareness of like how you fit into this and how your actions affect other people. And also how you can learn from other people and that have been through this process and not seeing everybody as just a competitor, right? Like, it's not like there's these 10 other artists, and if one of them gets a gig, then that means I'm not getting one. So I shouldn't talk to them, or I shouldn't build them up, or I shouldn't help them in their career. That's
it really, you're
help.
100% right. And you're touching on something that just frustrates the hell out of me, because, we hear these axioms, about, takes a village and this, that, and the other. I mean, in unified front and solidarity. And like, artists must lock arms and stand together and be that unified front, because it really is, I think, and this is, I guess, my activist mind getting it really is us against them. Capital, this is a very cynical view, but in my view, like, capital, is about as creative as a paper bag. Like, they cannot, they're very good at making money,
right?
But they can't do it without artists.
No, of course.
And
because creativity is risky, and they're not in the business of taking risks.
That's right. So it's a symbiotic relationship. But to your point, the power structure, like the artists have allowed themselves to be exploited. And, the capitalists, sort of, can make the rules because they've got the gold. But it's only going to begin to shift, right? I mean, it's, again, a very complicated problem, and it's going to take years and perhaps decades, or more. But, it's never going to work if artists don't at least start looking out for one another.
Right. Yeah. I mean, nobody is going to fix this problem, but everyone can take tiny little steps towards that, right? And I think there's a lot of value, especially in a current sort of political and social climate where people feel completely disempowered, they feel alienated, they feel like that they're completely disconnected from anything that's happening because everything that's happening seems crazy. I think there is a lot of power to taking actual small steps towards progress, not just making yourself feel a little bit better, right? Which I think is the instinct that a lot of us have. Like, let me change the channel and try to find, the kitten being, rescued from the tree because that'll make me feel better, right? No, I mean, how you feel is important for your self-care, but it's not really going to change these very real problems that exist. And I think that integrating into, really sort of understanding, what this community is, or what your industry is, or how you fit into all these different things, and really kind of looking at them from a perspective that is a little bit wider than just your individual day-to-day perspective, can actually make tiny but concrete, progress.
An elephant one bite at a time. Right. And, what are the other organizations beyond yours? There's Americans for the Arts. There's,
Fractured Atlas.
Mm-hmm. There's, Wage, I guess, is a new one. There's a Freelancers Union. I mean, talk about some of the organizations out there that you're aware of that you find that are credible and are, doing good work that artists can tap into to get some of this advice, some of these best practices.
I think there aren't a huge number. I mean, I'm familiar with some. Maybe it's a case that I'm not familiar with some of the better ones, or maybe I'm sort of living in this New York bubble, and the best ones are outside of New York. But some of the ones that I'm aware of that have actually helped people. There are guilds and the trade unions, obviously, but there's Freelancers Union is one that you mentioned. I've worked with them, and they actually got a really, really significant law passed here in New York City in 2017 that helps not just artists, but any freelancers that have problems getting paid by clients. They've made it so much easier to deal with non-payment issues if you're a freelancer.
And artists or freelancers?
Artists absolutely. Artists that work through. So the freelancers law, it's called the Freelance Isn't Free Act. I recommend that people Google it. Again, Freelance isn't Free Act, which is shortened to FIFA, unfortunately. But I guess, Not Real Art shortens to NRA. So
people have mentioned that. Yes.
Right. So anyway, this FIFA Act, which has nothing to do with soccer, it's only in New York right now. They're looking at maybe pushing it into New Jersey, and there's a lot of, it's a sort of a municipal citywide law. So every legislature is going to have to take it up on their own. Freelancers Union does have presence across the country. It's just that half of their membership is here in New York. If you do any sort of work on a freelance basis and you're just doing it on your own, not through a company, like if you have a company with multiple people in it, then the Freelance Act isn't going to help you there. But if you do work on your own, which is, again, 90% of artists, and you have a problem getting paid by a client, absolutely talk to a lawyer, talk to me, talk to somebody, because there's now much easier ways to get paid, and you can get paid multiples of what you're owed. So it is a huge tool for artists. Unfortunately, like I said, only in New York City for now.
Yeah, well, and it feels like there's a lot of energy around some of these issues because they're contemporary issues. They're new issues, right? So, people are going to organize and deal with them. But it's great that people are making efforts. But yeah, it's a big problem. So it's going to take a lot of people, right? It's
going to take a lot of people. It's going to take a lot of ideas. It's going to take a lot of effort. And the thing is that it is absolutely the right thing to do. So there are failed attempts, and, you hear about some organization that, went under, but they were doing good work. Then, that work has to continue somewhere. These problems will not 30 million individuals working on their own are not going to, unfortunately, solve the sort of macro problems. They might solve the micro problems as they affect them, but we need these organizations. And, people should be thinking, a lot, I think, about, what are the resources, if you're a working artist, you should be thinking about, what do I wish existed, right? Realistic, like what do I need? What kind of support do I need? Do I need sort of moral support? Do I just need people around that are going through the same types of issues and I can talk to them? Do I actually need to, do I need somebody who understands how insurance works and can explain that to me? If you're up in a scaffold, and something happens, and I've had these cases happen, like, you're going to wish that you understood how insurance works, not just your own health insurance, but your general commercial liability insurance.
Yeah, GoFundMe page isn't going to cover your medical bills.
Right, exactly. There's so many things, like you said, that art school doesn't teach. And, I urge people to really think about, what are the things that they need help with, and start having those conversations and see if other artists, other people are having the same types of issues, because, that's where ideas can start from, right? I mean, I think it's hard to even know exactly, beyond sort of tending to people's sort of basic material needs, which obviously is what people need. I think it's hard even for others to know, for, these unions or other organizations to know what are the actual, difficulties that people are having, and what do they need help with.
For sure. Well, we're trying to do a weekend with the conference, right? Trying to create a water cooler moment for artists and professionals like yourself and experts, subject matter experts, to come together and share, learn, and grow. And I'm thrilled, man, that we were able to sit down and talk today a little bit. I'm thrilled and grateful you're coming out for the conference. Are you looking forward to it?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I haven't been to LA in a couple of years. I'm very much looking forward to it.
Yeah,
I used to go every year,
come.
But yeah, it's absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to it. I work with a couple of the artists that are speaking, and I'm looking forward to seeing everybody. And it looks like a really cool roster. And I think the topics that you've chosen are, from my experience, are exactly the types of things that people ask me about. So I think it's great.
Well, thanks. Yeah, it's going to be an exciting day. We're super stoked. A lot of work to do between here and there in terms of selling tickets and making sure all the right people know about it. So for all of our listeners, please go to notrealart.com and check out click on the conference link and check out the programming and buy a ticket. Early bird pricing is happening while supplies last. So tickets are $100, which I think, it was funny. Somebody yelled at me the other day and said, well, it should be free. Right? That is so indicative of so many things that we were talking about today, even. Right?
Yeah. I work with a lot of artists, like I said, and a lot of creative professionals and such. And, my view on things is when I go to see one of their events or something, I never ask to be comp because I want to support them, because, they support me and I want to support them. And I feel like that's the way to do it.
Well, and you and I talked about this. I mean, we are giving you an honorarium for coming to speak, but that is not the same amount that we're paying artists. The artists that are speaking at our conference are being paid a fair market rate for giving a keynote presentation at a conference. They're an expert in their field. I did the research. And so for anybody to say that tickets should be free, that also implies that the speakers should work for free. These artists should work for free. It's this insidious cycle of insanity that artists shouldn't get paid for their work, or that people should be working for free. They're doing me the favor, or I don't know. My goal with the conference, right, is to provide, and this is a goal for me in many things I do in my life, is like, I try to underpromise, overdeliver. I try to provide. I want people to feel like they got more than what they paid for. Right. And I want people walking away feeling like, that they are empowered and inspired and informed as a result of, being there that day on March 16th.
100%. I think I'm not impartial here, but I think that people should absolutely invest in their own professional development and in community building. Those are the sort of the building blocks of this whole thing.
Well, somebody texted me the other day, or I guess it was Instagram. They asked me when we're going to be doing this in New York. And I said, let's talk to Ilya and see what's going on. And maybe we'll do one next year.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah, because we got to spread the love.
Right.
It's a big problem, big country. We got to do it, East Coast, West Coast.
Absolutely. And I think there's a big audience in New York for that sort of thing as well.
My friend, tell our listeners where they can find you. Tell our listeners, give them your phone number, because a lot of our listeners are going to want your services.
So we are at KG Firm, so kgfirm.com. All of our contact info is on there. You can email, you can call. And yeah, if any artists are out there and something I've said has sparked any kind of thought, like, I've been meaning to deal with this, or, I have this stack of work that's not registered, that's, call us or email us.
I'm noticing, my friend, that the photo we have of you on our flyer and on our website and stuff, you look like a very nice young man in this photo. Was this taken right out of wet behind the ears, right out of law school? When we...
Actually, you know what? No, that's funny. That was taken about 5 or 6 years ago. Yes. This job really has aged me, I think.
Well, I was saying, but you have the 5 o'clock shadow. You've got the beard today is a good look for you. You've got the rugged look happening.
I was also wearing a suit that I could not fit into today.
Well, do you have the rights to that artwork in the background?
We do, absolutely.
Practice what you preach, my friend. All right, Ilya, thank you so much, my friend.
Of course.
This has been great. I'm so grateful. And for all of our listeners, be sure to check us out at notrealart.com. Pick up your tickets today. Follow us on Instagram at NotRealArtOfficial. And we'll see you on March 16th. Thanks.